Reddit, what's your family's dark secret? NSFW. My mother was a groupie for Creedence Clearwater. There's 5 kids in my family and none of know who my older sister's biological father is. We all like to speculate about it except for my mother and older sister. My grandparents swapped spouses. My grandmother on my mother's side had an affair with my grandfather on my father's side. Everyone got divorced, and then my grandfather on my mother's side fell in love and married my grandmother on my father's side. Family reunions were fun. My great-great-grandma went out to dinner with her husband one night. Her husband thought she was looking at other guys and brought her to a hotel room nearby and slit her throat. He left her to die, but she survived and then escaped and left him. We didn't find this out until a few years ago through an old newspaper. My mom was raped when she was 14. Her dad, my granddad, tracked the guy down and shot him dead in a bar. My uncle, the Protestant minister, was doing wealth management on the side. Turned out to be other people's wealth into his pockets. Got caught and killed himself before they arrested him. Turns out my grandfather had been molesting my aunts as kids and other female cousins of mine. Finally one of them mentioned it to her husband and he called him and said either turn yourself in or I'm calling the cops or something similar. Now my grandpa is in prison. Totally out of nowhere for me too. He also said that if more victims came forward he wouldn't deny it. Mostly pissed that, if you really think about it, he got away with it. He's in prison now sure, but he was already dying. So just now on his deathbed he finally goes to prison for what he did. Also pissed that no one in my family seems to care and they're all trying to make excuses for him. My great-great-grandfather once got into a fight at a bar over a woman and murdered a man in said fight. My dad's family is messed up. His cousin told her husband that if he didn't stop smoking she'd divorce him. So instead of quitting he lied about having cancer. When he went to the hospital he told her he was getting treatment, but instead smoked at the hospital. This all happened before I was born, but yeah, her husband lied about having cancer for almost a decade. One of my aunties was a very ill woman like oxygen. To get out of the chair, going upstairs is a 1-a-week thing if lucky. Her son is a prick. When she refused to pay his drug debt off for the nth time because she had no more money he poured petrol all over the house and threatened to burn her to death. The fumes were enough for her to pass out. He panicked, took a handful of pills, then panicked at that decision and called himself an ambulance. Police turned up with I disowned him instantly. My uncle was apparently in prison for a couple years for sexual assault. No one ever spoke of it, and I didn't find out until after he suddenly died years later. He suffered from schizophrenia, and when his wife left him after years of refusing treatment, he wandered off into the woods and froze to death. Now we don't talk about either of those things. Edit. Oh, and my father only has one testicle. The other one never descended, and my grandma either didn't notice or was too embarrassed to take him to see a doctor about it. My family was smuggling diamonds in the Apeldoorn area of the Netherlands from the late 1800s up until WW2. They got pretty rich off it too until the Nazis invaded and took most of them into concentration camps. My great-grandfather, while on the trains to a camp, convinced himself and several others to jump from the trains. As they did, they were gunned down by Nazi soldiers, and my great-grandfather was one of the only survivors. My mom's parents were uncle and niece. Her dad married his brother's daughter. Their family was on the East Coast and they ran away together to California. They had 2 kids, my mom and her older brother. All of us are a product of incest. My dad is abusive and keeps my mother in debt, so she can't take us and leave. We look like a perfect middle class family from the outside, but boy is it ***T on the inside. I don't really think that this is a dark secret, but it's something that I didn't find out until I was an adult, which was mostly because my grandma doesn't like talking about it, so I think it counts. When I was going through some old stuff of my grandma's after the death of my mother, I found some old photographs of a baby, not my mom, because my mom had dark, almost black, hair at birth and this baby was blonde, and a birth certificate for someone named Francesco, mom's maiden name. I asked my grandma about it, and at first she didn't really want to tell me, but I gave her some space and she must have decided that I deserved to know. Or maybe she was just tired of having the secret, because she eventually told me. Francesco, who they called Frank, was my grandma's son. He was my mom's younger brother by a couple of years. Apparently, when Frank was 3, my grandma's ex-husband kidnapped him, and my grandma never saw him again. My grandma's ex-husband, my grandfather, although I don't consider him such, the least reason for which is because I never met him, was involved with a mob and it's suspected that he took Frank with him back to Sicily, but nobody is really sure. My grandma is pretty sure that he would have taken my mom too if my mom hadn't been sick and in the hospital due to tonsillitis at the time. It's kind of given me an idea of why that side of my family can be kind of withholding about things. I didn't know my mom had been married before my dad until I was a teenager. But it also makes me feel really sorry for my grandma. My grandfather died in 1946, before my dad was even born. We were always told he drove his truck into a ditch while drunk, fell asleep, and asphyxiated when the tailpipe got clogged with mud. He was in his early 30s at the time. Well, I got into genealogy a couple of years back and found a bunch of records and newspaper articles about the incident. Turns out Grandpa wasn't alone in the truck. He was with an underage girl, less than half his age, who also died alongside him. Obviously, this was not my grandmother. The newspapers didn't say it explicitly, but there was heavy insinuation that there was some side of the road romance happening when the fumes apparently overtook both of them. I still haven't told my dad what I found. Not sure I ever will. My uncle was investigated for the Green River killings. Years later he was investigated for the Spokane prostitute murders. He was good friends with Yates, who was found guilty, and his saliva was found on a beer can near a dumping site. When I was a little girl, my mom told me to never get in his car if he tried to pick me up. Funny enough, he sells life insurance. My granddad was into dating students before it became something people lost their job over. That's how our family got started. He taught, then gave extra credit to my grandmother. My great-grandma claimed for a long while that she was a virgin, which was why she adopted my grandmother, but I later found out that she had multiple miscarriages. IDK if that qualifies as dark, but it's definitely sad. RIP great-grandma. My grandfather raped and abused my mom and my uncle through their childhood. My grandma covered it all up, and he never went to jail. They live next door to us. Birth mum was a prostitute. Adoptive mum tried to kill my dad with rat poison. My grandpa killed himself when my mom was very young. Her alcoholic mother decided making her 5-6-year-old, my mom, help clean the blood and brains off the wall was a good idea, and giving her a beer for helping even better. Great-grandmother and a brothel. Great-grandfather was murdered by brothers who decided they were both in love with my great-grandmother. Great-grandfather was in the KKK. The KKK was quoted in the newspaper as saying something like, "We take care of our own." The brothers were never seen or heard from again. Edit. Brothers were 2 siblings, unrelated to my family, and not members of the KKK. I don't know how they planned to divide time with great-grandmother. Also, when my grandfather helped lay out my great-grandfather for burial, 9 bullets fell out of my great-grandfather. As far as I know, only my mother and I, possibly my stepfather, but I'm not sure, know that my real father wasn't some guy my mom dated in college, but a stranger who grabbed her and assaulted her. I didn't even know this until she told me when I was a teenager. I'm distantly related to the Unabomber. My grandfather's dad tried to join the Nazis, but his family moved him to Canada to prevent it. Edit. An apostrophe. Also, I put my grandfather's dad instead of great-grandfather because there's no blood relation. My mother was adopted and we never met him. Only info I've gotten is from my grandfather. My grandfather went away to fight in Vietnam, and when he came back my grandma was pregnant with my mom. A super distant uncle in my family used to get in a lot of trouble with cops. My nan and great aunt used to hide him, once hiding him in a freezer while cops searched the house. One day he ended up kidnapping an ambassador, successfully ransomed him off, tried escaping the country via boat, but the captain realized he was a crook and tried to take him to the cops. Distant uncle instead holds captain at gunpoint and dives off the boat several kilometers off land. Police never found him and assumed he drowned. Decades later my nan got a letter from him confirming to all of us he was alive and well. My great aunt had a second child and gave it up for adoption because she was a newly single woman and didn't think she could provide for both kids. This apparently caused a lot of drama in our family back in the 70s and people stopped talking to each other over it. My generation never heard a single word of any of this. Then, one day, my mom calls me to tell me about my new cousin. I was baffled and figured someone had a kid. Nope. That little girl that was given up for adoption was now in her 40s and hired a private investigator to find her biological family. She's since been assimilated into the family and I see her regularly at family events. My great-grandfather was a Christian Scientist minister. They believe that the mind can cure the body, and he told the family of a girl with diabetes, a treatable disease, to pray the sickness away. The girl soon died, and the girl's father killed my great-grandfather in a murderous rage. Grandfather tried to axe murder my dad. Cousin is a porn star by this time. I'm sure you've heard this all before. My grandmother had an affair with my aunt's high school boyfriend's father. It became very awkward when my aunt married said boyfriend and had a kid with him. Why? Because my grandmother married said boyfriend's father. My aunt now has a kid with her stepbrother. Found out when I was a teenager that my mom had an affair with my dad's brother and that my brother and I might not be my dad's biological kids. Edit. Just to clarify, it was rough for a long time and parts of my family are broken, but I love my mom and dad, mistakes and all. Serial cheaters. -1 RST. Grandfather made a lot of children. 12 for sure. In the same neighborhood mom grew up. Second grandfather made a lot of children. 14 for sure. With underage girls in the same neighborhood. Dad grew up. -1 RST. Grandmother had multiple lovers at the school she worked. Many of my aunts and uncles are suspected half brothers and half sisters. Second grandmother had a 20 years affair with her husband brother. Many of my aunts and uncles are suspected half brothers and half sisters in addition of being cousins. Almost all of my aunts and uncles divorced because of cheating, and the ones still married are cheaters. Dad had a 30 years affair with his first love until his death. I have a half sister and a half brother. Mom cheated a lot on my father during the 90s. I made a DNA test to make sure he was my father. He is. After I read her last will and testament, accidentally, and know she believes my little brother and I are the children of one of her lovers. I never told my brother, prays he is not my half brother and hopes my mother lives a long life before he has to doubt. We are not especially handsome or seductive in the family, so this was a shock when I learned about the cheating tendencies in the family. I don't want to end up cheating like them. Fun fact, a very nice girl I meet when I was in high school turned out to be one of my aunt. Nothing happened, but before I knew I wished. One of my cousins fondled another cousin when the latter was only 2 years old. I refuse to acknowledge the pedo's existence. Edit. Since multiple people are asking, the offender was 14 at the time. Me. So my biological father had me out of wedlock. No one in his family knows about me that I know of. I've never met any of them, and the last time I talked to him, he asked me to stay away because it would ruin his marriage/reputation. Honestly, I don't care that much. I didn't meet him until I was like 23, so by that point it's not like anything had really changed in my life other than another blip in my life. I've got way worse stories and issues going on, so it's a fairly minor blip at that. I've actually got a sister and niece that I've never met, but I've internet stalked a couple of times. I sent her $50 anonymously through GoFundMe a while back, but I doubt I'll ever contact her. There's no way I'd ever send a "Hey, it's me, your brother." I don't know if our dad ever mentioned it, but he knocked up my mom about 30 years ago. My grandfather broke it off with his first wife because she got knocked up by my grandfather's brother, who was/is also married. While my grandfather was deployed during the Malayan emergency, he had stress and anxiety issues the entire time I knew him, and I know it cost a part of himself to forgive his brother, to keep the family together. The worst part? She named the kid after my grandfather, tried to pass him off as a junior. The kid is now in his 50s and is in prison, selling prison art. Grandparents on my stepmother's side paid a hitman to take out my father. Luckily the guy had morals. He met my father and after talking to him a bit ended up telling him what he was originally there for and that he was going to return the money. My parents' cousin was a prostitute in the early 1990s, and when she died from STDs in 2000 my mother inherited $9,373 from prostitution. My dad was adopted, but illegally. His birth mother checked into the hospital under my grandmother's name, and then he went home with them instead. My grandfather died before I was born, and my grandma told us the truth a few years before she died. My dad was like 45 when we found out. My great-grandmother supposedly summoned the devil to have my great-grandfather murdered. It's an old urban legend, but if you met her, it might not seem far off considering she's quite the strange old woman and has a voice like that of that little midget lady from Poltergeist but in Spanish. My dad met my mom when he was getting a divorce. My mother is BATS***T crazy. Her sisters know, but just go on as if she doesn't really exist. None of us see her. She sometimes calls her younger sister to whine about her boyfriend. She'll be 77 soon. The guy is 50. They all ignored the fact that I was being severely neglected, that she was going through boyfriends at a rapid rate. Every single one was an alcoholic/addict and abusive as hell. I once asked my aunt through email if they had ever tried to do anything. Did anybody call social services or even talk about doing it? My grandfather was running an illegal abortion clinic in his apartment. He was living alone at that time. The scariest part is that he had zero experience and he was definitely not a doctor. I know he did prison for that, but I don't know how many years. What the F*** is wrong with the grandparents here? I've been waiting for this thread cause I just found this out over Christmas. Dad's ex-wife had 2 kids from her previous marriage. One of them, the younger one, was born deaf because her ex-husband shoved her down the stairs during pregnancy. Came to find out that he did not do that. He was the nicest man ever. She lied because a deaf kid is actually her cousin's. She F***KED her cousin when he was staying at their house for a bit and had an inbred kid with health defects. She hid this from her husband. This all came to light when the older brother, born from her husband, no health defects, told his dad that he accidentally walked in on mom banging the cousin. Dad got a paternity test, confirmed it. Deaf brother still doesn't know, praying no one buys him a 23andMe for Christmas ever. My dad has a secret kid that he never talks about, and his name is Chris, and he lives in Ontario, and me and my other brothers have no idea how to find him. Make sure to like and subscribe for more daily content. Thanks for watching.